The theme of today's conference is From Port to People, and we are here to talk about people. And I, in particular, want to refer back to the last two panels, particularly Vishaan's rough and tough panel. I hope it raised as many red flags for you as it did for me. Some of them were, in fact, actually mentioned in this previous panel, particularly by John. Thank you to John. But I want to say that really the critical issue in front of us now is really that every public space is threatened and has to be, like was said previously, vigilantly guarded and taken care of. And there are, in all the four cities we are talking about, there are enormous real estate pressures on these public spaces, so we have to be cognizant of that. But I want to say that what makes Istanbul special, what makes Mumbai special, what makes New York special is really the city going into the public spaces. So the public spaces being very closely connected with the city and working as a special part of it. And in the rough and tough panel, we heard a lot of good words. But when it actually came to seeing the projects, I was a little bit concerned. Even if they were designed by Norman Foster, I'm not sure that those public spaces were really people public spaces or not. So we have a wonderful panel now to talk about that. I am Geeta Mehta. I teach urban design at Columbia University with Professor Plans, who's here with us. And what we try to tell our students, many of my students are here today, is that no matter who's your client, your ultimate client is the people. You are standing up for the people. You have enormous responsibility in every project for the people. So that is where we want to come from. And so let me introduce our wonderful panel today. So first, let me introduce P.K. Das. He's an architect activist. He likes to call himself an architect activist. He has worked closely with many slum dwellers in ensuring their participation in public housing. He has stood up for and helped reclaim much waterfront public land in Mumbai and worked on many redevelopment and policy projects. He's actually worked with some Bollywood stars, so you may want to talk to him later about that. Regina Meyer has been the president of the Brooklyn Bridge Park Corporation since 2007. She oversees all aspects of the $350 million park, including design, construction, and maintenance. She has also served as a senior vice president for planning and design at the Hudson Yards Development Corporation. Before that, she was the Brooklyn Borough Director for New York, directing large parts of the Greenpoint-Williamsburg waterfront and rezoning downtown for high-density development. And Washington Fajardo is the president of the Rio World Heritage Institute, as well as the special advisor on urban issues to the mayor of Rio de Janeiro. An architect and urbanist, he is the founder of Carioca Center for Design. He created the financial mechanisms for restoration of properties on Port Maravilla. Okay. So,
you left me out.
No.
Because I'm an academic, I don't have all these credentials.
No, last but not the least is Sibel Bozdogan. She teaches at Harvard University and has also taught and is also teaching at the Istanbul Bilgili University. She studied at the Middle East Technical University in Ankara and holds a PhD from University of Pennsylvania. So with that, I'm going to actually start. Please, can you begin?
Okay, thank you. I come as a historian of architecture and urbanism, so I have actually two interests. I mean, one is how history and historians can contribute to urbanism and urban design, not nostalgically, but as a way of imagining what might be possible and how collective memory can be recovered. And the second is, of course, the word public space, what a more rigorous understanding of what we mean by it, especially in a city like Istanbul, where I wanted to start with this image because the waterfront is really the ultimate public space that is Somebody was saying recently that the Bosphorus is Istanbul's Central Park, which actually captures it very well. Unlike many other places where you are talking about how to bring people to the waterfront, in Istanbul, people flock to the waterfront in huge numbers. So it is more a matter of how you can, through design, maintain that diversity and this vigilant engagement of the public that was mentioned. I really like the phrase very much. So those are the two interests. Anyway, I'll be very, very quick. Where's the... Okay. Let's just move. While visual access to water in Istanbul has been spectacular because of the topography, of course, the steep topography, physical access to the edge was historically rather limited. Because of, you see here the Byzantine sea walls on the top left, which are from 5th century. They were coming all the way to the edge until the 1950s. Okay, and here's the Bosphorus edge conditions, with the so-called yalız and the mansions, Bosphorus mansions, the wooden yalız from the 18th century onwards. And the right image is Golden Horn with all its polluted industries and shipbuilding, etc. So, in other words, access to the edge was actually quite blocked in those cases. Two major 20th century urban infrastructural interventions have changed that. The first one is, I don't know if you can see it very well, but the opening of the littoral roads along the shores in the 1950s, which involved a huge amount of demolition and massive landfills, which altered the city's historic relationship to the water's edge. I don't know if you can compare the images on the left and the right. On the left is after the demolition of the Byzantine sea walls, the road now passing along the shore. And on the right, this happened in the 1980s when in some parts of the Bosphorus, like the images I'm showing you, because the road and the landfills came to the front, those traditional historical yalız are no longer yalız. In other words, they are no longer on the edge of the water. So this was the first big change. The second big change, this is just an image which tells the story. I thought this is interesting to look at the historic peninsula before the demolition of the Byzantine walls and after the littoral road was built. The second important development, which was already mentioned a few times, is the Golden Horn regeneration, which turned Istanbul's polluted industrial zone of shipbuilding, factories, the electricity power plant, etc., into a vibrant culture, arts, and education band today. The cleanup, which started in Mayor Bedrettin Dalan's time in the 1980s, was actually hastily done, resulting in indiscriminate demolitions and loss of industrial infrastructure that could have been repurposed and incorporated into new projects. Nonetheless, it did give Istanbul a continuous band of open green space available for post-industrial uses in the context of Istanbul's bid for World City status after the 1990s. Private sector led the way with universities, major museums. You can see them in the map there. And just one example, already mentioned by Ulaş, the campus of Bilgili University was retrofitted from the old Ottoman electricity power plant, which was built in 1911 and was later decommissioned. And this project actually testifies to the positive effects of these initiatives on the surrounding poorer neighborhoods, because easy access to parks and museums have brought these poorer and conservative populations in contact with university students, urban middle classes from other parts of the city, etc., which is, I would say, a major accomplishment in a society that's so polarized today. So these are the two major developments. Since 2000, a third mode of urban intervention along the waterfront is underway, and here I'm back to our famous Galata port now. These projects reflect the neoliberal urban policies of the AKP government, which is that formerly public lands and public properties are privatized and open to the highest bidding developer, as in the case of Galata port, which intends to revitalize the existing port facilities into a culture, tourism, and commerce zone. Now, there isn't much transparency in these biddings and contracts, I actually saw the project first time this morning when Mr. Bilgili showed it. What I'm showing you here is from 2005. It's a project by Murat Tabanlıoğlu architects. This is the earlier bidding. And these renderings from 2005, but I didn't see a different spirit in the new one either, suggests a rather generic mixed-use development with retail shopping, offices, and hotel and luxury residences, which give us the concern of, again, one of the previous speakers used the term zones of monoculture, which instead of something that's really, really specific to Istanbul, because there's a lot of, even by looking at these renderings, you get the sense of unifying and gentrifying a very messy fabric. You can see on the image on the lower right, the existing situation, a very messy fabric and flattening its local particularities. And here I want to show you an image, more historical image, because the site has a very rich history, which includes, well, on the top left, you've seen that before. It includes the Ottoman cannon foundry, a Baroque mosque. You can also see, if you look closely, where the shoreline was before the landfills in that top left image. But also, if you look at the big image, a Ford motor car assembly plant in early 20th century, which is seen in that image and was demolished afterwards. In the 1930s, there were electric company offices. The middle image on the left, it's a building that's no longer there, but it is by Sedat Eldem, this very famous modernist architect, and it was one of the first Corbusian principled building that was demolished in the 50s. So he is the same architect who is the architect of the warehouses that we are told this morning are going to be demolished as well. And many preservation-worthy buildings for the ports and customs facilities, offices, warehouses of the state maritime lines, not to mention many small businesses, shops, cheaper restaurants, and popular backgammon playing and water pipe smoking cafes, tea houses of Tophane, etc. The people who know Istanbul will know what I'm talking about. So the question is, can we perhaps think of alternative scenarios that acknowledge this remarkable history and urban memory of the site as a place of production rather than of consumption? And I would like to come back to that. Lastly, the second project, which is also in the works currently, is an even more recent and more controversial proposed development, the Imperial Shipyards project on the northern shore of the Golden Horn. What's proposed here is a new development with 2 marinas, 2 5-star hotels, shopping, restaurants, convention halls, cinemas, a 1,000 people mosque, and parking. Now, it has raised very legitimate concerns regarding the preservation of industrial heritage, because the buildings in red are sort of registered industrial buildings, but if you put these into account, there's not much space left for such a monster program. So it's a question mark there. And also, secondly, the imminent erasure of the history of the site as a place of production and education. The site is the original site of the establishment of marine engineering of Istanbul Technical University. So it was an educational and a production space. And somebody mentioned it earlier, it is one of the few remaining still productive shipbuilding or ship repair areas. So what you see on the lower right is the shipyards proper, which goes back to the 15th century, really. That's a separate part of the project, and the rest of it, which you see there, is the Marina project. So to wrap it up, in a country where state still owns most of the land, and the establishment of a proper capitalist property regime was delayed by at least a century, so large urban projects like these do serve to turn public property, which is state-owned and state-controlled, into public space, which is theoretically accessible to everyone. So in that sense, what is said about creating public space is theoretically correct. But what really is public place, and which public are we talking about? When did upscale shopping malls become the paradigm of public space? I think that's where the questions are really. So how can the waterfront be more than just prime real estate to be developed? I think that's the question around which there's so much discussion going on in Istanbul now, because at least in the last year, since last summer, as you all know, there's a lot of awareness of these problems. So since I have very limited time, I'm ending with 2 images and 2 questions that I hope can generate the discussion. The first one: how can the design of the waterfront offer public spaces that are open, accessible to all, and above all can be occupied in diverse, non-prescribed ways that evoke popular, familiar, everyday forms of shore use? Because after all, in Istanbul, the most successful public spaces are the least designed ones, especially on the waterfront. I mean, I've done some work on beaches, swimming and beaches in Istanbul, and very interesting facts, like in 1934, under the Kemalist early Republican regime, there was actually a law that you couldn't swim otherwise, unless you are in a designated beach area, and there were many, many beaches, which then disappeared, but people still swam. You know, people jump in wherever they could. And the same goes for a lot of design parks that are not used as much as you would think, but then there are these residual spaces along the edge that are living, you know, if you go there and really study those. So the first question is that one, and the second one: how can new projects acknowledge and reinterpret the history and urban memory of working waterfronts, ports, and former industrial sites? A question that has been central to urban design for quite some time, but one whose significance we are beginning to appreciate only now in Istanbul, and especially in relation to the Imperial Shipyards project, because of that existence of an actual, educational and productive environment that is now threatened by this new development. Thank you.
Thank you. That was excellent. Sibel, I want to ask you that everybody in the audience has seen the Galata Port proposal. What would need to happen for the magic of Istanbul to permeate a project like that, and for the waterfront public space to truly become public?
Yeah, I don't know how the final design could take shape, but the important thing is the process, really. And as it has been mentioned already, there is, to my knowledge, no public participation or even listening to planners and architects and schools of architecture, where proposals are made. So, first of all, I think a much more rigorous study of what is existing there and what its history is. That's where I come in. That's very, very important. I mean, we just had this discussion earlier, for example, with the warehouses. For me, not only because they are the design of a famous architect, but even as structures, I can't dismiss them that easily. There might be many ways of keeping the skeleton, retrofitting it, because it is part of collective memory. I mean, generations have lived with that facade, right. those buildings being there. So it's a difficult question, because history and collective memory, as we all know, can also be, there could be a very selective appropriation of history for ideological and political reasons as well, because this is a whole other question, but the whole events of this summer erupted because the Prime Minister wanted to construct the military barracks. So that's a good example of how contested history is, and identities are contested too. So what you select, what you want to preserve, what you want to change are all decisions that are not neutral, that have a certain politics in it. So that's why your best bet is to bring together the largest, most representative sector of the society to exchange ideas on those, rather than just learning from the newspaper that this company has won the bidding and we're going to have this particular project.
Actually, I think to many of us it was very encouraging to watch the very robust debate in Istanbul about what public spaces, what open spaces. And I'm, as far as I know, this debate has not even started in Mumbai, so I'm going to ask PK to talk about the situation of the waterfront in Mumbai, please.
Thank you, Geeta. Well, for me, having actively engaged with various citizens' movements for reclaiming Mumbai's waterfronts, public spaces, and the waterfronts in particular, has provided the ground for my continuing work and learnings. Of course, within the larger commitment of democratization of cities, integrating water and waterfronts, whether they be not just only the seafronts, but lakes, creeks, and water streams, and so on and so forth, with neighborhoods and the city is a significant step towards the achievement of the objective of reclaiming and integrating the waterfronts. Having said that, what has been most insightful in these various movements is our tryst with planning and design as tools of social change. The various waterfront projects have been effective means for democratic endeavors, strengthening struggles, and deepening democracy. This has been a challenging journey amidst exasperation and exhilaration. What are the lessons learned? I put these sets of questions, you may call them questions, they may be ideas, they may be issues to further explore. And what I've learned, therefore, from these movements across about more than 14 to 16 kilometers of waterfront projects that have been collectively implemented through the initiatives of the local communities in different parts of Mumbai city, is the first point, and that is to do with building community networks and movements for expanding public spaces. I think one of the critical issues that we're facing with urbanization and cities expansions is the shrinking public space, both physically and metaphorically, or democratically speaking. And how do we, so that's probably one of the key questions that I'm putting forward. But the first thing in that is really capturing the waterfronts areas by local communities. I call it capturing. We have to grab them. And so these experiences build up from those exercises and acts of capturing waterfront areas by collectives. Understanding waterfronts as a significant political and cultural space. Waterfronts truly, or any public space for that matter, are truly significant political spaces. Mobilizing participation and public action. We've read a lot of theory and in philosophies on the points of participation and public action, and we know that public action deeply influences decisions that governments take. Mobilizing, promoting public dialogues and campaigns, which is an essential part of the work in the democratization of waterfronts and public spaces. The whole culture of public dialogue, which is otherwise thinning away, is disappearing. Building collaborative efforts. Now, this is significant. Collaborative efforts across individuals, across organizations and experts, and so on and so forth. Demystifying planning and design. And this is extremely important. It's false. It's not true to say that, only the architects, planners can get together with this exclusive skill of designing public spaces. Public spaces can be envisioned, can be visualized, can be designed by larger participation of all the people in the area. And this must be done so. And how do we redefine the mainstream practices and our knowledge and skills and capabilities? Popularizing waterfronts is the last point in the first point that I'm making as social, cultural, and environmental space. We have to popularize these public spaces, these waterfronts, and of course, populate them as well. The second lesson is really about achieving unbarricaded and open waterfronts. Barricading is one of the first responses we have, and how do we challenge colonization of public spaces and the waterfronts in particular. Checking abuse and misuse of the waterfronts, as we've seen across Mumbai and many other cities where we've kind of turned our backs to the waterfronts, really, literally, both physically and metaphorically, and use them as dumping grounds. How do we confront the conflicts and contradictions within these movements? These movements also throw up many critical questions and ideas that generate. Gentrification is one of those. Often there are attempts to make spaces exclusive, turn them, gentrify them, displace traditional occupations, relationships, memories, and all of that. So this whole attempt of gentrification, and how do we confront conflicts and contradictions within these movements of dominant groups, of leaderships, of ideas of exclusions, and so on and so forth. The third lesson, which I'm presenting for you, is really about collaborative governance. And how do we develop, how do we build up alternate governance models that are participatory governance models, and how do we build platforms in which such participation by all the people would be possible, really. And that's a big challenge, because often when we get on to discussing and conducting public dialogues, we are forever making it difficult or excluding more and more people from it by the fact of the languages and tools and communications that we use. So how do we really build participatory governance models and platforms? The next point in this is really engaging governments. I firmly believe from our experiences that we cannot exclude governments. The governments are responsible for social development, and they have to be brought on to undertake these responsibilities. And so engaging governments which are otherwise shirking their responsibilities, particularly under the neoliberal globalization and privatization effort. The third is influencing legislations. That means how do we influence the law, the legislation, in order to make it much more relevant and acceptable. Ensuring inclusiveness, which is to contest and oppose the kind of exclusiveness which is becoming increasingly the way of envisioning cities. Promoting tripartite between citizens, governments, and sponsors. Demanding, now this is just an idea that I'm putting forward before you, is demanding planning rights as a fundamental right, ensuring participation in planning and design of our cities and public spaces in particular. So planning rights as a fundamental right, as much as with any other rights that we have. The last lesson, or the fourth one, as I'm just putting it very briefly, is integrating the waterfronts with neighborhoods and the city. Now, this integration is really at many, many, many levels. It's integration within movements of people. It's integration of ideas, of designs, to integration of specific waterfronts and waterfront projects with neighborhoods, and the neighborhoods as an idea of the city. So the integration is really a very complex and multi-level process in which one of the central ideas is really the idea of expanding public spaces, which I talked about earlier. The second is really promoting walking and cycling. This is particularly important in Mumbai. We have this new area that we're developing, which we call it the Mumbai on 2 feet, where we are talking about walking and cycling increasingly becoming ideas about mobility, promoting the ideas of mobility through walking and cycling. And this is also significant because it also challenges our increased dependency on motorized transportation, which is drawing away funds into more and more roads and flyovers, and it's an unending exercise that we know that more roads cause more congestion and bring more cars. So walking and cycling is an essential aspect of the integration of the waterfronts. And more importantly, and walking and cycling is also social networking. And that's what we've experienced. The next point is about conserving and protecting our eco-sensitive borders and integrating the natural assets of the city. Now, for example, Mumbai has this enormous and vast extent of natural assets. It has vast mangroves, wetlands, creeks, rivers, lakes, and the seafronts, and all of them could be integrated into the public realm, into an idea of public space, and in which public begin to relate to them and begin to then sort of work on towards its protection and conservation and so on and so forth. But more importantly, this is important towards building up a resilient urban ecology. and in that sense, resilient cities. And I think that's a big question of our times that I leave that for further discussion. Battling socio-environmental justice, and this is extremely important. And the last point in that really is about integrating the waterfronts with the neighborhoods in the city, which I've talked about again and again. But this is a very interesting process where there could be three levels of, to put it simply, three levels of working. One are specific projects. Let's say the first picture that you see of a promenade in a particular waterfront of a particular neighborhood. So you have specific individual projects. Then the next level of work could be an whole area integration, where the second slide that you see, the second picture that you see, is really about an area of 4 square kilometers in Mumbai, an entire neighborhood, and how the waterfronts and the public spaces could constitute a networking of the area. And from there, leading on to the next one is really the idea of the city. So I conclude with this slide where I'm saying that therefore one of the big central ideas is re-envisioning cities with public spaces being the basis of city planning. This is to think beyond buildings. And this is to think beyond the cities are essentially an opportunity for expanding construction and real estate turnovers, which have been oppressive, which have been displacing, which have led to gentrifications and so on and so forth. So this is really about re-envisioning cities with public spaces, and of course the waterfronts is part of the public spaces system, being the basis of city planning. And the second, which is really, like for example in this slide, we try to redraw Mumbai's, the idea for Mumbai city. We're saying that by simply conserving the vast extent of natural assets of the city, defining buffer zones for each of them, and defining them as, reserving them as public open spaces, and interconnecting them, provides nearly 500 kilometers of walking and cycling across the city. Those red lines which probably are not very prominent in here. So that's, in a way, an example of re-envisioning cities with public spaces and waterfronts being the basis of city planning. The second and the last point really of my presentation is reclaiming public spaces and integrating waterfronts movements are a significant struggle in the struggle for democratization of cities. I think that's essentially the idea of these movements and projects. Thank you very much.
So I think one could imagine that if everything PK said happened, then the 1/8 of Mumbai, which is currently the Port Authority land, would become public space, social housing, mixed use, and Mumbai would live happily ever after. But I want to tell you that another opportunity about of this scale actually did happen in Mumbai, in that there were these mill lands that had been empty for quite some time, and all the architects and planners were running around making these amazing proposals about how public space and mixed use and social housing could happen. But when finally the land was released, almost overnight it got just completely taken up by developers, and guess what you see there is big shopping malls, and you see super luxury housing of the type that has swimming pools on every floor and 6 cars to every apartment. So my question to PK is, why wouldn't that happen in waterfront? And if not, what would you have to do to stop that?
I think one of the the points that I made really in the beginning was that these, what I'm talking about, are born out of experiences through these struggles. Mm-hmm. And each of these struggles have led to transformation of the public spaces and the waterfronts, of whose examples I'm giving. Mm-hmm. So I think these are not just, planning ideas. These are not just physical planning ideas or romantic ideas. They're, of course, ideas, dreams, and desires, but they're actually rooted with the idea of people's movements enabling change. And unless these struggles and these movements are really popularized, the democratization of public spaces or waterfronts in that sense, in putting it in succinctly, is not going to be possible. So it's not just about a great idea. It's not about influencing governments privately or through private funding or through some social influence of class interest. It's, I think, about the capturing of space through social movements. And in that sense, the integration of planning and architecture with social movements is very critical, because ideas about planning and design do not come from heaven. They have to be born out of people's movements. And people's movements throws up these ideas that could then be translated into ideas in design and planning. And I think that is a kind of a very deep relationship with that. And we have to, therefore, even as professionals, intermingle and merge and work with social movements. And social movements would have to also capture professionals to work with them in terms of being able to translate social demands to ideas about physical forms and structures of spaces and structures. I think that's the kind of dynamics I'm talking about.
But I think it has to be not just bottom-up, it also has to be top-down, because Vishaan in his panel actually asked people that, so what is the developer's responsibility towards public space and the city? And I think that question didn't really get answered satisfactorily. But I'm going to now turn to Regina, because she has experience on both sides of the fence.
Yes, can I have the...
Please.
Yeah. Good afternoon. Thank you for having me. I'm going to actually talk about one specific example in Brooklyn, Brooklyn Bridge Park, which is a park located in a prominent location in the New York Harbor. This location of the park was formerly part of the Port Authority's operations as a part of the harbor. And here you could see a slide that actually was about 30 years ago in the 1980s, before containerization totally took hold in the New York Harbor and transferring most operations to Port Newark and other ports and parts of New Jersey. So you could see this phenomenal location, though. You see both the Brooklyn Bridge and the Manhattan Bridge in this slide. And then on the right portion of the slide is the wonderful historic bluff of Brooklyn Heights, which was really considered one of New York City's first suburbs, but really Brooklyn, when that was built, was its own city with its own gentry on the hill. This port became disused and vacated pretty quickly once containerization took hold. And happily, as the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey started to discuss the reuse of this property, there was a huge community movement centered in the adjacent Brooklyn Heights community that fought for a park here. And this really, although there was obviously a tremendous amount of government interaction, I cannot stress, and I think John Alsholer alluded to this, that New York City community participation is a tsunami. I'm going to stick with that line, because there were hundreds and hundreds of not only public meetings once the government got started on this process in 2002, but there were not one but 3 community organizations that were established fighting for this location. So this is in a way a top-down and a bottom-up process from my perspective. Here is the plan for that port area. It's 1.25 miles along the Brooklyn waterfront. This the entire site was both master plan was led by Michael Van Valkenburg and Associates under contract to initially the state of New York through its development corporation, and now through the city, and also designed by Michael Van Valkenburg and Associates. And we've been happily building it now as its successor organization on a phased basis since we've been in construction since 2010. I wanted to give you, because a lot of the discussion was about public access and how to create good public spaces, I just want to give you a few examples. These were some of the early projects we took on. This is Pier 1. It's actually our only pier that is on landfill, so we were able to use that landfill to build a phenomenal location. This is the promenade that was actually used from the exact dimension of the truckway around the pier. We left those as a way to harken back to the past, and now you could see it retrofitted for public access. You can also see here, this is the same pier, outfitted particularly for large gatherings. We have movies, film, concerts, and festivals here all summer long, actually starting May 8. If any of you, the students, are here, I hope to see you down at the park. We also I wanted to give you an example in the southern section of the park. This is Atlantic Avenue. Also, you could see it was an entrance to a portion of the port. Atlantic Avenue is also equally as an important thoroughfare in Brooklyn, and we felt it had to be given a great entrance to welcome people into the park. And now this is this location. We've used that location at Pier 6 and Atlantic Avenue as this wonderful destination playground. The water isn't turned on quite yet, but hopefully by Memorial Day. Here, this is an interesting slide talking about the historical reference. This is a soccer field that we've designed for Pier 5. This is literally a block from the water play I just showed you. But you could see in the background, there's these light blue pier frames. The design specifically did salvage specific portions of the port structure as a way to harken back to that history, and we're quite bold about that. All of the concrete footings have just remained the same. We haven't dolled them up or painted them, and it's quite clear that these are the pier sheds from the port era. Here is the greenway that links our entire park, and this is a very important point for us. Biking and walking are huge parts of how we get people to the waterfront, and we were able to work with a real grassroots movement in Brooklyn called the Brooklyn Greenway Initiative to make sure their entire biking and walking initiative coordinated with ours. So this is a specific a point I think that's really important, and I echo PK on this especially. And that's it. I stuck to my 5 minutes.
It's wonderful.
I think the real magic of New York actually is that they're extremely capable professionals working on behalf of the government who are standing up for the people. And then the developers, of course, also have very capable professionals, but they can come head to head and negotiate in a very equal way. And I know that doesn't happen in Mumbai, yes, but I think it doesn't happen in many other places that we are talking about. And so I think that is one important point to note, that how to strengthen government's capabilities to, in terms of design, in terms of urban design, in terms of understanding the issues and be able to, dialogue with that. But to you, I want to ask a question that, so your model is that this is public space. It is completely managed by private entities, by the buildings around that, right? You were saying that they pay for the upkeep of it. Brooklyn Bridge Park is a sole purpose entity. We are fully owned by the public. We're, we build, operate, and maintain the spaces, but our maintenance is derived from private development on the site. They are not responsible. They simply transfer funds, which we shepherd into our maintenance fund. But yes, I mean, there is a public-private partnership set up, and I think the success in this degree is that we are really the ones that care mostly about the public space, that this is a space that's open to the public, and give the public an assurance that although there are private funds coming into the park directly, it's not a private space. Right. And last night we were talking about Bryant Park in the same formula. So do you think that is what is going to happen more and more?
Well, I think in New York City there's a question of management. John certainly in the prior panel raised that as a question mark. Clearly, the strength here of this sole purpose entity is that we can focus on this entire waterfront. And there's so many vulnerabilities in working on the waterfront. The costs of not only building the waterfront but maintaining the waterfront infrastructure are massive. The liabilities go out way into the future, and I think the concern, at least in the New York City model, is that an overall city agency that's also concerned with an entire park system would never be able to make that kind of commitment to a specific site. If one of my piers fell down, I would simply get in the queue so to speak, in terms of receiving emergency funding. So the specific magic here is that our funds are specifically set aside for this specific site. So that is very successful for New York City on large projects. I mean, John alluded to that in terms of Queens West, Battery Park City, and others. Will it happen more? I think as our government officials have to address the overall needs of the general fund, it'll continually be part of the answer because they'll understand the value that we can derive from private development, and that's sort of that's how these are lined up.
Right. But you have also worked on the Hudson Yards project, and I want to ask you that if Hudson Yards' financial structure had been similar to Battery Park City, would there have been different kinds of or more public spaces or not?
It's hard to say. I mean, the stress on the Hudson Yards project is the cost of the deck, right? So once you start talking about the sheer magnitude of the cost of decking, a lot of other hopes and dreams and aspirations, unfortunately, just can't be afforded, and that drove the density. I mean, also the placemaking in town versus on the waterfront, I think, are two different things. When we look at the placemaking in a place like Brooklyn Bridge Park, you're thinking about this phenomenal location on the water with the views and the ability to have all sorts of recreation are really what you're driving at. When you're looking at a project like Hudson Yards, you're thinking about placemaking in town. So 10th Avenue, 11th Avenue, 34th Street. There's a lot of public space goals, but they're not the expansive public space goals, because we all know as planners that making a great public space also makes a great combination of uses. So I don't specifically think that means just more open space. It means, what I think it means in Hudson Yards is making great avenues and great connectivity into the rest of town.
But maybe it's sometimes not fully understood that great public spaces actually are good for business and make great real estate opportunities.
No, understood. But I just don't think that the answer on 10th Avenue or 11th Avenue was just more public space. When the real desire was, okay, I want to make sure people get from 34th and 7th Avenue over to 11th Avenue. What is that pedestrian experience? What are those struggles? Those are not always about open space. They're totally about quality design and planning.
Thank you. So I'm going to now request Washington to talk to us.
Okay. Thank you for the invitation. I'm thrilled to be here in this very interesting dialogue with this possibility to meeting different perspectives of every city. I would like to share our experience from the heritage sector, from the City Hall of Rio, and I would like to start to talk about time. So this is, we have to run here. We are also running here to deliver these global events, and we are using these global events as excuse to get things done. This is very important in our history, with a lot of undone projects, with a lot of fragmented projects, and we got a very special condition in the port area. So I need to bring back to some issues. The port, it wasn't into the original master plan to the Lipke-Bind. So this administration is doing a lot of effort to change the original master plan with IOC to bring more investments to the port area. So this is very important. And basically, it's very important to understand the challenge. So what's happened with the downtown area of Rio? Basically three things have happened. For almost 40 years, we got a very stupid legislation that do not allow housing in the downtown area. That was made by this another stupid view from architects and urban planners concerning this functional use of the land. So the downtown area should be only used for work. So I think the society that had a lot of very interesting comments about our work, because we used to tell to them to only work of that, and now we have to tell to them to create mixed use. The second aspect is a lot of federal properties into downtown area, specifically into the port area, because it was landfilled by the state, the capital, and we are not the capital anymore. So you got this very strange condition to this land, which looks like our offshore land. So we are able to do a lot of improvements. We are able to do a lot of laws, but we weren't able to create a political agreement. Anything it's possible to get done. So, and the third aspect, it's a non-place, this Terrenvag environment. So we changed the mobility of the downtown area. We used to have to 1960s more than 400 kilometers of tram lines into the whole city. And we abandoned this very human scale mobility, very European mobility, to change to a very North American mobility. So we start to construct elevated highways, and we transform the urban tissue of the downtown area to create space for cars. So now we are running to change that. So one important aspect is to this downtown area, the port area, it's this new mobility. We are doing a much more connected areas with VLT, with bike lanes, with also a cable car, and also a BRT. And all these plans are now possible to get done. So it's not more hindering anymore, it's the real thing. So we are, this is very important to our culture. It's very important also to the community that live in their areas, because this community have been waiting for a long time for improvements. And we are doing the same kind of global strategy that every city in the world is doing. We are doing iconic buildings, cultural buildings, but always with the to pay attention to the local community. So the Museum of Art of Rio, it's very important to the local community, not only creating jobs, but also create a space, a room for dialogue with these communities. And we got also very astonishing architecture, as the Museum of Tomorrow, designed by Santiago Calatrava. And on the other hand, in this very exciting environment with a lot of real estate development, with this very sophisticated financial system, we were able to review. It's not a discovery in itself, but because a lot of historical maps show that, we are able to review these archaeological sites that was totally connected with the slaves' times and also to the imperial time. So this is very complex to do because all archaeological founds belongs to the federal government, but we are working very close and also very hard to attract the Afro-Brazilian community and also to create a spiritual meaning to these sites. It's very important that because we are a very unequal society, but we are also a Hippocrates society, so concerning about racing. So it's very important this material heritage totally connect with the Afro-Brazilian culture. Well, I'm in charge of the heritage of the city of Rio, that is very interesting definition, which is what we call cultural environment. And we got this definition to protected zones of cultural environment that starting in 1984 and had increased a lot. So now it's almost 35,000 buildings in these areas. And if we also connect this cultural preservation with also environment preservation, we are talking about a city that wants to preserve a lot. So this sounds good to the real estate people, but also that means that the city understands the value of this contribution of the nature in these areas, and we want to support that. And in the port areas, there is a special rule on that. There's a lot of heritage sites over there. And we had a very important struggle in the conception of the financial system, and we were able to create this 3% mechanism. So all this amount of research, we asked for 3% of that. In fact, we asked for 5%, but in negotiation we got 3%, which was very good. And now it's one of the most important research to heritage in the whole country. It almost cost my head, but it worth, because it's very important to understand in this new future the presence of the past. And also, I think that's very important to understand into the waterfronts. Waterfronts are not only physical condition, but they have to got also a meaningful condition. So we are doing a lot of restoration, buildings. This is our first public school of the city, and now it's a cultural center focused on Afro-Brazilian culture. And we are also doing a lot of into the new waterfront of the city. I think we already saw that. We are tear down 5 kilometers of elevated highway. And we are able now to reveal this new quality to these public spaces and historical sites. And this is a very dramatic image. And this is a very special times for the city because we are, in fact, we are bringing some values from the past. On the other hand, we want to use the heritage not only a past instance, but to understand that the value of the heritage is to support us in these transformations. No one is able to live in the past. So no one is able to live in this historical, only utopian space. It's very important to understand the role of the heritage as supporting this transformation and managing the transformation. That's what we are doing. And now we are finished the project, the designs for this new waterfront, and we are going to start this work very soon. And that's it. Running.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to ask Washington if they just dynamited down a potential High Line.
Sorry?
Did you just dynamite down the elevated highway? That could have been like New York's High Line.
Well, I would like to do that.
A little bit late for that. No, I think what really happened...
In fact, we could move to there right now. And
yeah, you could build another one. But I think the power here is aligning of the government, political, and business interests, all with a view of finishing this or doing these projects before a certain deadline. I think, would you say that is what has energized it?
Well, this... We got this traumatic experience into the city about these undone projects. We made this new avenue in the beginning of 20th century, very Haussmannian avenue, and 25 years after that we start to demolish this beautiful Belle Époque avenue. And in 1945, we made another huge avenue in the downtown area, the Presidente Vargas Avenue, very influenced by the cars and avenues by US, and we got till now empty plots in these areas. Mm-hmm. So we demolished a lot of hills in the historical districts to create more space, and until now we still got empty plots in this area. So mm-hmm. This process to get things done, it's a very new condition to us. And on the other hand, we got this. Unfortunately, we got this lack to the cultural planning and also to design planning, because a lot of political issues and the democratic phase of the country weren't able to create a better structure for planning. And sometimes I think we overestimate these conditions, and we are now we are doing this transformation, these projects. Mm-hmm. In the other hand, we are trying to create a better condition to this planning. That's why there's a lot of public-private partnership mm-hmm. in these areas.
Because we are in the GSAPP, School of Planning and Architecture, I think everybody would want to know, what was it that was so stupid about, you said there were some, what was the word you used? Stupid plans proposed by architects and planners. Oh. One or two, very quickly.
There's any architect in urban planning in the room. I think we know very well. We had told to the society that, well, it's good to sprawl it, so it's good to have a car, and it's good to build a lot of highways. And now we are telling the opposite. It's very interesting to see the medical doctors. They are able to say, well, eggs with bacon are bad. And after that, they say it's good. And after that, they say it's bad. So what is happening with the architects and the urban planning? So I think that, and we love also to use these a lot of buzzy words, resilience, sustainable, and we are using these words into a not good condition, to the society. I think it's very important to talk about these traditional values of the city, the historical values of the cities, and also the cultural values of the city. Not because of the physical space, but because we are humans and we need this kind of condition to stay together. So it's not only fancy design into waterfronts. It's very important to create space to stay together and to create these common values to share. So what is these common values? I think it's culture, it's spiritual experience, and that's what we are trying to do that in Rio. And I think it's very important to understand this complexity of this cultural environment. Whereas the traditional business, there's a lot of importance, these cultural manifestations, and to make parties in the streets and festivals, I think it's very important. It's the whole complexity of this traditional city, markets, and we got a lot of lessons, just look to the history. I think we should stop to use these buzzwords and start to talk about a good city, in fact.
I just want to second that, to repeat that when we are talking about collective memory and heritage, we shouldn't be thinking only of buildings and historic buildings, but certainly about activities, traditional purposes for which that area was used, but also skyline, shoreline. I mean, we talked about landfills, for example, in the Istanbul case. Landfills have always been the strategy of adding more land to be developed, and it has transformed the shoreline over the years. It's fascinating just to look at maps, and very recently, some of you may know, for example, in Yenikapı there's this huge new demonstration field that there's a Google map which is unbelievable. The entire shoreline is changed by this huge landfill. So these are all affecting culture and memory. So we have to think of it really in a very, very big way.
We would now like to open the panel to questions, please.
Just a question on citizens' participation.
Wait till a microphone comes to you. Yeah.
Citizens' participation again. 90% of Americans vote to live in suburbia, which is wasteful, ecologically unsustainable, and which is destroying the planet. So, I mean, if you take citizens' movement, 90% of Americans want to live in an SUV and commute far to work. We have the same problem in India. I mean, asking the neighborhood community to agitate and convince the elected representative to have a green space in the neighborhood is probably the easiest thing. Who doesn't want a green space in the neighborhood? So it's necessary because that's the way democracy functions. But we have citizens, like in the US, in developed society, we have aspirational middle class in India who want their Suzuki, their Hyundai car, which costs nothing. It costs 1/3 of the construction cost of a parking space today to buy a car. And they all feel that it's their constitutional right to have a car, a 3-bedroom apartment, 3 cars, 4-bedroom apartment, 4 cars. And the politicians have responded very vigorously and forced the private sector. They won't do it in their own housing, but they force the private sector to build so much car parking within the cities. When in New York City, you are not allowed to build car parking unless you count it in FAR. And in India, they would consider it undemocratic, unconstitutional. There'll be agitations on the streets. They'll probably throw stones and rocks at people. So how do you say the citizens' movement itself, per se, can be good?
No, I think people's movement very much is about, for example, in the Eastern Waterfront, is if there is a vision and if the vision is articulated and it is shared and there is a robust debate on it, I think it could go in totally different. It's not just about one green space, it's about a holistic vision about what the city is. But I'm going to let my panelists respond.
May I respond
yes,
to
please.
that? I think you're completely wrong when you said that people will protest in India if car parking space is reduced. I think only influential people, very selected people, maybe in people like in your business, will actually not protest, but they will influence clandestinely the governments to change decisions. At popular levels, there will not be protest against reduction of space for cars and car parking. In fact, it's the other way. So, I mean, I'd like to just correct that. That's not the reality, really. Yeah. That's a perception that you have of your own.
And I also find it a little problematic to talk about what people want, people's aspirations for American suburbia as a justification for, what we have to do, whereas the idea is what else is possible, if that is articulated, as you said. People come along. I mean, at least in Istanbul, we have seen this past summer, how not only there are social movements with which architects and planners can engage, but architecture and planning can be the generator of the social movement. That's what happens. Yeah. It is through these issues that people really mobilize. Yeah. So.
Yeah. I would add, in terms of from the New York City perspective, sometimes the cars do count as FAR, sometimes not. But I think, interestingly, what we're seeing in a lot of new development is that cars are, the demand is going down in certain areas of New York City. I think it's largely, it's generational. I think in an area like Greenpoint, Williamsburg, I've been stunned to see how the car usage is actually decreased in terms of comparatively other places in Brooklyn, just comparing it by borough. But I mean, there's certainly other areas of New York City where car parking is a very high demand. So a lot of this comes from not only a generational shift, but depending on density and access to services. So it's a complicated question.
Yeah, I have to say that in United States, now there was recently an exhibition that was sponsored by our university. It was about the suburbs, particularly the ones not on transit lines, are going to be the slums of the future. So I think there is a big shift going on in people's preferences. But I'd like to hear some more questions. Good, we have a lot of hands. Please. Yes. Since there are so many hands, could we have 2 or 3, let's say 3 people ask the questions and then the panel could respond. So please ask.
It's something of a sort of comment or a theme. I mean, I actually think it would have been interesting to have, in the theme of mixing things up and weaving your perspectives with others, it might have been interesting to actually have mixed panels. Mm-hmm. We might get that in the comment section, but rather than having sort of like-minded people in one panel and another like-minded, to actually mixed up the panels, it might have been interesting.
Thank you.
This has mostly to do with the Istanbul. In looking at the diagrams of the large plan, it sort of reminded me of Robert Moses, actually, on the East River, where you see the very detailed texture of the city behind, mm-hmm. and then these very large superblocks along the water. And that, I was on the boat yesterday for another conference where we went down the East River, and all of the public housing along between the Brooklyn Bridge. And given that's a downscale superblock versus an upscale superblock, mm-hmm. but it still reflects a philosophy of not bringing the existing fabric, to the waterfront. And I'm wondering, as opposed to, say, Battery Park City, which does it a much better weaving in an upscale version. And I'm wondering, there's obviously some example. There's lots of examples like this around the world where we've made mistakes and mm-hmm. recognized them. And I'm wondering why those aren't being recognized now. Mm-hmm. And I guess that's sort of what you're here for. But mm-hmm. any comments would be...
Thank you. Let's have the other 2 questions. There were 2 more hands. and then the panel could answer them together.
Yeah, PK, you made a beautiful distinction between public space being not just physical space, but also kind of democratic space, a democratic space. And I was wondering, and to me that means that an individual can hold their civil rights. So I was hoping you could talk more about that.
Very important, yes. Thank you.
I would like to address my question to Washington Fajardo, and I would like to know, how do you see these spaces reflecting the heritage and the cultural tradition that's very important in this area?
Thank you. Please, PK, maybe you can start with the question that was asked of you.
Well, actually, your question is rather big, or rather deserves a very big answer at many, many levels, but I'll cut that down to maybe just one or two aspects of that. Why I said that this is an interesting, this is not just a physical space, it's a democratic space. I said it's a political space because this is really unbarricaded and clear and open waterfronts, public spaces, truly are opportunity for people to intermingle. All kinds of people come in when they're unbarricaded and open and free. You have the richest of people there. You also have people from the slums, you have children from the slums playing, women, working women from poorer classes also coming there. I mean, it's been a great experience for us in Mumbai to see some of these open and clear open waterfronts that we've developed. But I would like to just take another point from where she was talking about and you raising issues relating to funding of projects. It's very important, and it's a part of this democratic endeavor. You know, in some of these experiments or struggles or projects that we've worked on, now over 12 neighborhoods and areas, we've made a sort of a decision in each of these areas that the capital expenditure must come from the state. It must be public funded. It cannot be private funding. It must not be private funding, because funding plays a huge influence in the designs, in the decisions that are taken, and the kind of shapes and forms it takes right up to its governance. So we've kind of ensured, when she said jokingly that I work with Bollywood stars, it just, you know, many of these Bollywood stars have become members of parliament. And what we've tried to do in each of these areas, that we've tapped the members of parliament funds which are given to them by the parliament to spend in their constituency, and invested them into these waterfronts and public spaces projects. So they're essentially public projects. They're implemented by public agencies. They're not just private contractors who implement them. And so the funds are collectively managed. The accounts are collectively published and put up in these public spaces. But where does the private come in? We're not going to exclude them either. They're making enough money. They cannot get away. They have to put it back. So we've turned the pyramid upside down in some of these areas when I talked about governance. What used to generally happen is that the municipal corporation of the government leases a public space out to a private company to develop and manage it. And invariably, we found that gradually over a period of time, these then become restricted spaces. They're then colonized by these private companies, whether it's just by the fact of limiting time for public entrance to much more. So what we've done is we turned the pyramid upside down, where the residents' associations, the local area movements are at the helm at the top of the pyramid. And at the bottom is the private sponsor or the funding agency and the municipal corporation or the local government. And the funds don't go to the municipal corporation from the private agencies. The funds go directly from the private agency to the residents' association, to the movement. And the movement is collectively responsible for its accounting, not the municipal corporation. And what the municipal corporation does is, obviously, as I said in one of my statements, we don't let the government go scot-free. Its primary responsibility is social development. And they would have to come in and invest and work on that. And they put in the capital for infrastructure, for example. Let's say water supply or power or, sewage or whatever it be, because these are larger concerns and capital-intensive works. So I think that's another way of sort of an experiment, which has been effective. And you'll be surprised that we've not just developed by now more than 14 kilometers. I'm just putting it in terms of lengths of waterfronts, not just the seafronts, but, lakes and nallas or water courses and stuff like that. But these are actually managed on a day-to-day basis by the local communities in partnership, in collaboration with the municipal corporation. So I think that's democratizing governance and finance, in a sense, in public interest.
I want to ask you a question, PK, that if these public spaces or the waterfront spaces are managed by resident associations, are these associations not primarily of middle income people who then will try to exclude people from slums? Because in India, that sort of thing happens a lot too.
Surely, I talked about it very briefly when I mentioned that there are inner contradictions and conflicts that the movements have to gradually face and resolve. They are obviously led in the beginning by middle class, upper middle class people. But more importantly, if their ideas prevail, they have to be challenged. And of course, movements have inner contradictions. There are many, many complexities that can only be dealt with if it's an open and democratic forum.
Yeah.
But if it's a controlled and centralized organization, they tend to be overwhelming and unsurmountable.
In the case of our project, it was very clear from a community perspective that one of their biggest concerns about our public-private model would be that the people who are paying in would control the public space. So it was, that really is sort of one of the major raison d'etre of our organization, is to ensure that it's those residents who are not controlling that public space, just for that reason.
Right, thank you.
That's an interesting...
Washington, do you want to address the question that was asked of you?
Basically, we are doing 4 different key aspects. First, we are doing a lot of restoration to these landmark buildings and structures into the port area. Second, we are using this resource of this amount of money that we were able to create to use to support private housings, maintenance, and especially refurbishment of facades, roofs, and some structural and aspects of these private properties. It took a long time to create this understanding that we could be possible to use that public money to support this private properties refurbishment. We have to fight against the law also. You have to fight especially against the lawyers of the city hall. You have to push them to understand these new values. This is we have to do that, and so this is a very important aspect. And there's also a social aspect, which is to support this community in this area. And the third aspect, we are also using that money to support cultural manifestations. The housing and these cultural manifestations, we are using that money by public calls. We make public calls to projects, and these communities send us projects, and we support with that research. And so in that area, we got a very specific project, which is we create this Afro-Brazilian heritage route inside of the port area. And the fourth aspect, it's we are working with the small and medium entrepreneurship federal agency to support this local community to start new business, new companies, small business into this site. And also there's a very interesting aspect inside of this topic, which is very focused on Afro-Brazilian entrepreneurship. And so basically we are doing this four aspects. What happened that these aspects are not site located into the waterfront because they are in the historical urban tissue. Because the waterfront it was into the landfilled area. So what we are trying to do is to create this environment where the memory and the history became very strong and very present. And we had also a very interesting topic, which is very new and very hard to do, which is how to support traditional business, traditional bars. We got a very important urban setting in the city of Rio, which are bars. We call Butch Kings. So this kind of commercial space, there is also a public function. If you drink with somebody in this kind of space, it's a public, it's also city happening. So we are trying to create this environment with with a much more strong vitality based on memory, but not based on a conservative agenda, not based on a not in my backyard agenda. We are always trying to push this community to understand the value of the history to create innovation. My basically concern is about the quality of this new corporate architectural in this area. Sometimes we are not able to control that or to make some influence of that. So this is one of the hardest issue in the port, in Porto Maravilha area. So we are trying to create this environment. I think that's very important that this new waterfront, they got 3 different typologies. There's an interior street. There's a new walking waterfront. It's a totally new, historically speaking. No one was able to go into this area because historically was a military area. And we got this refurbishment of an existing area. So we got these 3 typologies to this waterfront. And we are working hard in this, somehow, this backstage of this waterfront to create a much more human scale and also a memory environment.
Thank you very much. With that, we would like to thank our wonderful panelists.
Okay, that's fine. It's the legal rights issue.